Well, hi there, Daya. I'm so happy to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
What an honor to be here. I'm thrilled for this conversation.
Me too. Me too. I'm so excited. This might have to be like a several part conversation because I feel like there's so much we can talk about. I always like to start by asking people, what their connection is, what their personal connection is to yoga and what role it's played in their life.
Well, I actually came to yoga through meditation first. And it was as a kid. So I was really lucky to be born into a family that really emphasized and practiced meditation. My parents come from two very different backgrounds. My dad's Black, grew up in Harlem, and my mom is Indian, grew up in India, England, and then California. And they were looking for a place to get married that honored my dad's family history. His dad was atheist, his mom was Christian, my mom's Punjabi Sikh. And they're like, okay, how do we do this? How do we
Yeah,
get
wow.
married in a place that honors all of that? And they found a spiritual path that just really resonated with them. It tapped into my dad's scientific side, and it really was a way to bring yoga to the Western world. And the emphasis was meditation. So as a kid, I was meditating every night with my parents, just a couple minutes with my brother and parents. And, um, it was probably something that I took for granted. I sort of assumed everyone had a meditation practice with their family.
Yeah.
And then I started practicing the asana piece much later. It wasn't until college. And I was a dancer, ballet and modern dancer growing up, and my mom said, you should really try yoga, it'll help. And
Hmm.
at that time it was really just flexibility, that's why so many people first start.
Hmm.
And I was a teenage girl and I said, no, I don't need to do that, and then went off to college, and that first class hooked me, as it does so many of us. And I just felt like I could take over the world, and practice decided in 2007 to do my first teacher training. And I had no intention of teaching. I simply wanted to deepen my own practice.
Hmm.
But as often is the case, I realized that this is a gift that needs to be shared. And I then began teaching, and now I incorporate it into my practice. And it's really the cornerstone of everything I do, personally and professionally.
That's amazing. So, you have a neuroscience degree. So, when you did your teacher training, where were you in your more traditional education at that point? Like, when did those two merge?
Yes. So I started my teacher training January 2007. And then I actually, after college, decided I wanted to do a master's in sports psychology, kinesiology. So that fall, this was a year-long teacher training program. I started my kinesiology, sports psychology master's program. So that was the beginning of it. That was starting to work with athletes. Towards the end of that, I realized, okay, I miss neuroscience. I was a neuro major in college. I like getting deep beneath the surface. I need to go study neuroscience more. So then I've completed my teacher training, finished my master's, and then went to do my PhD in neuroscience.
Was there, this is like a total aside, but was there ever a point where your parents were like, enough school? Because you were like, I mean, that's a lot of years under your belt of
It was
schooling.
a lot of years, but
Yeah.
but my parents had the same problem.
Oh, yeah.
so,
Okay.
so my dad actually did a PhD. He did a master's, a PhD, and then an MD. So
Wow.
I actually did less school than
Wow. Oh my
him.
gosh.
And my mom got her master's in nursing. And they've always been so supportive, and they just said, you keep going. Like, at some
That's so
point, this is
amazing.
all going to make sense, and it's all going to come together. And from an outsider's perspective, it was, okay, hold on, you're doing yoga and neuroscience and sports psychology. I mean, what is this? And I said, I don't know, but my dad said it's going to make sense one day, and I'm just going to trust that.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So, so you grew up a dancer. I saw that you almost went to Juilliard, which is so interesting. Um, and then you studied neuroscience. Where does the interest in sports piece come in that you did
Mm,
that master's program?
yes. So in my undergrad, as a neuro major, our thesis was to write a grant proposal. So we didn't actually have to carry out the research, but we had to write a proposal about a question that we were excited about. So I was trying to think, okay, what's something I can do, maybe ballet or dance related, but has to do with the brain. And my brother, who's younger than me, was playing basketball. We were a big basketball family. And I said, okay, well, there's something here. Like, we can talk about maybe what happens before you play a game. What's going on in their mind? Is there anxiety? Can we measure that? Sure, we can use cortisol to measure stress acutely. So that could be a cool idea. So that was sort of what got it started, was writing this proposal, having this question. And then I found the field of sports psychology, and I realized, wow, okay, well, I love sport. I mean, I grew up as an athlete, and I know how much of the mind is involved with athletic performance. So I'm going to go study that.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's really what led me to it, was just asking questions and figuring out where I need to go to start answering some of those questions.
Hmm. You have the ultimate educational background that combines body and mind. We always talk about, that pathway and connection, but like, you've studied that in so many different facets. So, when I reached out to you, I said, I'm just so interested in learning from you where you started to see connections between what has been studied so far in Western science or scientifically, and the crossover between that and the tools that we have been using in yoga for millennia. So I wanted to just put that question out there to you. What are some things that you've been fascinated to see have been corroborated that you use all the time in your practice?
Yes. Well, I like how you put scientifically in quotes, because obviously the yogis back in the day, thousands and thousands of years ago, were the scientists of their
Right.
time, right? They were the ones asking questions and doing these experiments and trying to see, like, how do we get here? How do we know ourselves more? But yes, now we have the scientific method, and we have all of these tools at our disposal. And with really the blossoming of neuroscience in the past few decades, we're able to quite literally peek inside the brain. I think, just for context, we can appreciate that the Western scientific method approach to yoga is so new. I mean, the 50s and 60s were probably when the first studies on meditation were starting to come out, and those were physiologically based. And then by the 70s, we were already getting a lot more information. But that was not that long ago. I mean, we're talking half a century. And so now it is so hard to keep up with the amount of data that's coming out. I think from a personal standpoint, when I just started my PhD at UCLA, I was connected with a researcher who was doing neuroimaging work, and she was looking at the brains of doing MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, to look at the brains of people who had been meditating for a long time and comparing them to non-meditators. And she and I connected, and she asked, would you like to be a part of the study? You've been meditating your whole life. Do you want to do this? And so I went through the whole rigmarole, going in the MRI scanner. My goodness, do you have to practice pranayama in there?
Oh yeah, that's right.
It is challenging for anyone, loud and just so disruptive. But it was a really cool study, and she showed me, what they're able to look at, and also what the limitations are. And that started getting me interested in some of this. And while my focus in school was concussions and neurodegenerative disease, I always had a little bit of my focus on what was happening in the field with the yoga and meditation research. now we've gained a lot of information, and we know the psychological and physiological benefits of yoga, right? Like we know it improves your sleep, it benefits your emotional well-being, reduces stress, decreases your heart rate, all of that. But I'm so curious about what's happening at the level of the neurons. Like when we say that our brains can change and neuroplasticity is a phenomenon that occurs and it doesn't just stop when we hit 25, it keeps going.
Right.
What does that look like? And how does yoga and meditation affect that? And the studies are really phenomenal.
I'm
And
so excited to hear that.
it's
This is
so
so
awesome.
hopeful, right?
Oh,
It's
it's
so
so
hopeful.
hopeful. And there's so much more to learn. I think, as is the case when you're starting to look in one area, there are a lot of people using a lot of different methods. And because yoga and meditation is so vast, there's not a lot of replicating the same studies yet. But that's okay. Right now, we're just kind of throwing everything out there and exploring as much as we can. We're appreciating the breadth of this.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm excited to share what some of these studies are showing. And so I think we can break it down. Should we just dive into this?
Yes, let's dive
Okay.
into it. I'm excited.
So one way I like to think about it is breaking it down into structural findings and functional findings. So structurally is, how is the brain actually changing? Like how is the gray matter, the white matter changing after yoga or meditation?
Mm-hmm.
This is usually done with MRI. And again, there are a wide range of styles that have been studied. So Kundalini, Iyengar, mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR plus asana practice, meditation only. I mean, it really runs the gamut, but we can essentially break it down into experienced yogis and non-yogis. And okay, so there's a couple really, really cool findings. The first one is that there's an increase in gray matter, and gray matter is like the cell bodies, so the neurons, the body of those neurons, that's where they live, in the gray matter. The axons that come out of those neurons compose the white matter.
Okay.
But the white matter is really how they communicate with each other. But the gray matter is where a lot of the activity happens. So in one area called the insula, gray matter has shown to be greater. It increases with the yogis versus the non-yogis. Okay, so why does that matter? The insula is related to interoceptive body awareness. So
that's huge.
yogis, perhaps unsurprisingly, are more sensitive to physiological changes in their body. And that really matters because that is also related to our ability to deal with stress. So if we're sensing, my heart rate's increasing here, my palms are getting a little sweatier, if we're sensing those physiological changes, we can modify them. One of the things I do with my athletes is really crude, basic biofeedback. So what does that look like? We're not hooking them up, doing anything fancy. I'm just simply having them take their pulse and then take some deep breaths and then feel how their pulse slows down. That body awareness is huge. And it may be because our insula is thicker. There's more there. Also, another part of that is that body awareness is associated with pain tolerance. So in yogis, we see not only increased gray matter, but also increased connectivity in the insula. And so there's more connections between different parts of the structure. And what's really cool is that yogis seem to use different mental strategies than non-yogis to deal with pain. And that probably has something to do with this insula again. So yogis will activate their parasympathetic nervous system, right? We relax, we observe the pain, we almost detach slightly, but accept it at the same time. Non-yogis have decreased connectivity. They have decreased volume in the insula. They'll ignore the pain or they'll try to distract themselves. So this may be the neural mechanism underlying those differences.
Wow. It's
There's
really
also,
Oh,
No,
sorry,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just was going to say, I mean, this is hopeful to me because for kids who are identified as having sensory processing disorder, I happen to know a lot about that. One of the things they really struggle with is interoception. And so it could be like on the extreme end of that, it could be challenges with extreme challenges with potty training, right? You can't
Yes.
sense when it's time to go to the bathroom. On the less, so it could be anything from that level, which can be really debilitating for people in their life as they're growing up, to the level of like what we have noticed with our daughter over the years is, and it's gotten so much better, which is perhaps like mindfulness practice that we do with her, but is also perhaps development, right? Her development just might be a little delayed, but not knowing when she's hungry, right?
Mm.
So often kids will just, I'm hungry, I need a snack. She can't always tell when she's hungry.
Interesting.
So what happens is for a child, right? If they go too far past their hunger, they have a meltdown.
Right.
Everything shuts down. They can't
Right.
function.
Right.
So any of these things with interoception can really affect your whole quality of life. Because before we knew that she couldn't perceive that she was hungry, we just thought she was really prone to meltdowns. And
Right.
you respond to a person a certain way when you think they're really prone to meltdowns. But once we started to learn, like, oh, honey, you're hungry. Trust us. Please trust us. Please trust us. And then, okay, once she started to eat, she could feel the hunger.
Mm.
Once she was finished eating, she could reflect and say, oh, yeah, I was really hangry. So it's
Yes.
like this whole process once you know that. So that's amazing, because that could really, for young people, knowing that these practices would help could really change so much in their life as they develop.
Yes, that's the power of all of this. I mean, we're not doing this just to find changes in brains and what structures gain volume. I mean, it's what are the applications here? And at what age do we start really paying attention to our mind, body, spirit practices?
Yeah.
And as we start to tease apart, specifically what styles of yoga or which pranayama practices are
Mm-hmm.
going to have the most benefit, then we can tailor things much better. So the therapeutic potential is tremendous. And I also find it really empowering. I think as I was getting my PhD, I loved teaching kids about the brain, and they're so fascinated by it. And
Yeah, they
I
are.
can see, yes, your daughter being so thrilled to understand what's happening, like
Yeah.
what actually is happening in the brain and how she can affect change there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty funny too. The teacher sent home, we have to do these benchmarks, and the teacher sent something home that said, because she has ADHD, and so we teach her about dopamine, and we teach her about just the way her brain is wired, and we talk about it all the time. And she knows now that she can focus for a certain amount of time on a non-preferred task, and then
Mhm.
her brain is just like, I'm done.
Yes.
And so the teacher said that at a certain point, Sophia will often say, my brain's not working anymore. And I was really excited about that. I don't think the
Yes.
teacher was that excited about that, but I was like, no, this is actually a really good thing. She's not trying to be smart. She's not trying to be sassy. She's
Yeah.
genuinely knowing, and she's not taking it like, oh, I just can't do this, or I'm terrible. It's like, my brain's glitching. She'll just say that, my
Exactly.
brain's glitching. It's just not, it's offline. I need to go move around. I need to go do something else.
Yes, yes, yes. Oh my goodness. More of us need to have that awareness,
Yeah.
because how often do we fight through something and we hit a wall and we just keep going and keep trying, and our brain is really like, no, I need to
Yeah.
stop. And we spend so much time talking about focus and how to hone focus and how to be productive and how to be efficient, but really our brain actually needs a lot of time to unfocus. That's been proven. So we have to have that balance. And that's what's so beautiful about this yoga practice, is that it does offer that balance. It's the effort and the surrender. It's both, it's all of it.
Ah, yeah. Okay. Well, I want to know more about the unfocusing, but I also don't want to interrupt you if you were going to share like your next finding. So we can circle back to that, or we could talk
Yes.
about, yeah. Okay.
Let's circle back. There's a couple other things. So um, and these will be kind of quick, but hippocampus, that's the seahorse shaped structure in our brain that's related to learning and memory. That increases in volume in the yogis versus the non-yogis. Um, and then what about areas that decrease gray matter? So one is the amygdala. And the amygdala is really involved with our emotions, our fears, our all that stuff. It is a deep-seated structure. And gray matter is decreased there with the yogis. So that again relates to stress. We have a better relationship with stress. We perceive stress differently.
Hmm.
So those are just some of the structural findings, but the functional findings are also really exciting. And this is, we're looking at activity in certain regions of the brain. So one of the things we see is that there's increased blood flow and activation in the prefrontal cortex. And this is important because the prefrontal cortex is involved with executive control. This is things like impulse control, planning, controlling our emotions, working memory, mental flexibility, which is critical in just living in this world.
Mm-hmm.
There's more blood flow going there when you have practiced yoga for an extended period of time. There's also, and this is probably the area that I'm most excited about right now. It's the default mode network. So the DMN, because neuroscientists love to use acronyms for everything, the DMN is really cool. So for a long time, we thought that when your brain is active, completing a task, doing a task, working on something, that's when it's active. And when it's not, when you're just resting, it's quiet. Well, it turns out that's not the case. When we're resting and supposedly not doing anything, the default mode network activates. It's what's kind of the background noise. That's cool, but what we've learned is that when the DMN is overactive, that's associated with rumination and depressive symptoms. So we don't want an overactivation in the DMN. When we're focused on a task and everything's good, that's great. But then when we stop, we don't want to slip into ruminating all the time. So what do we see with this work? Well, we see increased connectivity within the DMN and reduced activation. So by doing something like practicing yoga, like practicing meditation, we are quieting the default mode network. And that can have profound, profound implications for anyone dealing with depression, but also any of us that tend to slip into that place of, okay, mine's going. That work is really exciting. And really the default mode network is pretty new in the neuroscience space, like last 10, 15 years or so. We had also talked about before we actually connected this way, but alternate nostril breathing. And that's just one of the many types of breathing practices that have been studied. I would say that alternate nostril breathing is probably the most well-studied of all the breathing techniques. And it really benefits cognition. So specifically verbal and spatial memory and focused attention. So it seems that there are probably different practices to incorporate based on what we're needing more of. And it's going to be really cool to see where all of this goes in the next 5, 10. I can't even imagine where this will be 20 years from now.
Yeah.
It's just starting. I mean, there are studies looking at brain waves and what does that mean? Why does that matter? It's endless and it's really thrilling.
Can you say a little bit more? I'm so curious. I always think of like just from a personal experiential point of view, alternate nostril breathing is just very settling for me, like very grounding. I didn't know about those other benefits. Can you talk a little bit more about what you mean by those benefits? You said verbal. I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, and spatial memory.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
So, so there's so many different types of memory, right? Verbal memory is being able to hold words in our mind. So if you hear, as you're listening to me speak, you need to be able to hold on to, and this is related to working memory as well. You need to be able to hold on to what I said at the beginning of this sentence to understand it by the end of the sentence, right? Um, Spatial memory is knowing where we are in space and knowing where to move. And I mean, when we think about the yoga, the asana practice, we need to know if we've visited Warrior Two over and over again. Our spatial memory allows us to revisit it, to be
hmm,
there again, to get into that position. And then on a more macro scale, it's where are we just in the world? How do I get from here to my son's school? I have to have some memory of how that works, and that's where spatial memory is involved. Um, and also back to focus, that focused attention. So these are all really big cognitive benefits. But to your point of feeling grounded, I've heard people say, we practice alternate nostril breathing to sort of balance the left and right hemisphere of the brain. Um, I think what was really meant by that and what the science supports is that one nostril, and at this moment, I don't remember which one, but one is more associated with the parasympathetic nervous system. The other is more associated with the sympathetic nervous system. So by alternating the breath, we are balancing those two very important parts of our nervous system. But we're
hmm.
making sure that one's not out of whack and really weighing down the other one and just showing up more. So that balance is absolutely what's going to contribute to you feeling grounded and settled. And probably the cognitive stuff is benefiting that as well. So when we're let's just take the word feeling scattered. When we feel scattered, we're in our heads, we feel like there are all these thoughts going around, and we are certainly not grounded. The opposite of that is okay, our feet are firmly rooted, we're connected to the earth, our mind's quieter. We probably have tapped into our ability to pay attention to one thing at a time.
Hmm.
Um, that's what this can do.
That makes sense. I'm just, that's really amazing. I never extrapolated that level of benefit for a breathing practice. So
Yes.
that's really interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. So you spend your days these days as as a mental performance coach and consultant for mostly for athletes, right?
Yes.
So how do you work with people, and how do you use how do you convince athletes that yoga is helpful for them, and how do you tailor it to them?
Yes. It's really cool how this has evolved during my practice while having my private practice. It wasn't something that I talked so directly about early on in my career. And that's probably because 10, 12 years ago, it wasn't mainstream. Like we weren't talking about yoga the way we are talking about it now. Huge celebrity athletes weren't endorsing meditation apps like they are now.
Mhm.
We're in a different space. And so it's made it a lot easier to talk about this thing that I've always been so passionate about and fully believe in. So I, well, first of all, I've come to the realization myself that there is such beautiful synergy between yoga and athletic performance, and specifically yoga philosophy. I think, when we talk about yoga, why do we do yoga? It's to connect to ourself, right? A capital S self, to cut through the stories, the limiting beliefs, the layers. We want to gain access to that which is, to our light, to our bliss. Why do athletes pursue their sport? For all of the above. They want to connect to themselves. They want to cut through the stuff. They want to connect to something deeper, something more.
Hmm.
So to me, it makes so much sense to merge the two. They're both practices of unifying the body, mind, and spirit to really realize who you are. It's about self-realization for both of them. Now, I don't go into working with an athlete talking like that at the beginning. I really want to meet them where they are. And that's what we learn as yoga teachers is we have to meet our students where they are. It's the same with sports psychology, mental performance consulting. So yes, many athletes first are introduced to yoga through the third limb, through asana, because it's going to help prevent injuries, because it's going to help them gain that body awareness. But actually, the majority of athletes are already doing the fourth limb. They're practicing pranayama. They are paying attention to their breath. So for me, that's the easiest access point. And we start really simply talking about that. We start with a single deep breath, and that's incorporated into their pre-movement routine. So let's take a baseball player. I'll have them show me what they do before they step up to the plate. What do they go through? Like, I'm watching them, I'm asking them what they're saying to themselves. They may hold the bat, look at it, take a quick little breath, and then keep going. But often they don't. And so we talk a little bit about the science. Like, what does taking a deep breath do? It lowers your cortisol acutely. It helps you focus your attention. It relaxes your body. If you're really tense at the plate, you are not going to have as much control over that ball. You need to allow the swing to happen. You have to allow that contact between the bat and the ball. So we work on that single deep breath, and that's their real introduction to this.
So even one single deep breath can have a profound effect on your cortisol.
It can have an effect.
Okay.
Yes,
I only ask because I do that again. Like, this is pretty interesting because I'm relating this all to how we could work with kids. Because I often tell my daughter, like, just take one breath. And because it's hard, kids resist things like this. And it seems so basic to them too. And right. I'm learning how to explain the science to her. So it's just, I'm just checking in with, that does seem to be an effective starting place.
Yeah. And that may be, I mean, I think for a lot of kids, they might not be able to relate to cortisol and like what that really means, but it is quieting the mind. One deep breath, if you're focusing on that deep breath, you're quieting all the thoughts, like all the chatter. In sport, we talk about them as ants. They're these automatic negative thoughts that just kind of crawl all over our minds. A single deep breath quiets that. It slows your heart rate immediately. These are all things that are dropping you into your body so that you can think clearer, so that you can move forward from a centered place, and then perform at the level that you're capable of performing at. So yes, the breath, and then we get a little bit more complex with the breathing. So I do a lot of 4-7-8 breathing with athletes just to really reduce their pre-competition anxiety, alternate nostril breathing as well. And then it gets exciting because then I'm starting to incorporate the other limbs of yoga without them necessarily knowing it. And maybe we'll get to the point where we talk about it and I use some of these Sanskrit terms, but maybe we don't, but I'm still conveying this to them. So dharana, we're talking about focal points. We're talking about mantra and affirmations. These are anchors for them to use. And the athletes use this all the time, even the yamas and the niyamas. So, okay, how do we incorporate asteya on a deeper level into athletic performance? Well, we talk about how are you stealing energy from yourself? How do you steal it from other people? Let's pay attention to what's happening there. One of the big things I do is help athletes develop their mission statement. And I realized, oh my gosh, this is aligned with Satya. This is truthfulness. This is having integrity in what you do, knowing your truth, knowing who you are, knowing what your values are, and getting really crystal clear on that. How cool. And it just keeps going. And over time, I help them develop a deeper meditation practice, because ultimately, that's the one thing that I firmly believe is going to carry them through their lives. At some point, they're going to stop playing their sport. And we've seen time and time again athletes slip into deep depression when they leave, because their whole identity has been wrapped up in that. But meditation is this powerful, powerful practice that if they have that as an anchor, I know it'll serve them when they start playing their sport. So it's really important to me that I help them develop that practice. And they start to see, oh, okay, this is cool. I mean, I had a college quarterback who you wouldn't necessarily think is going to say, talk to me about meditation.
Hmm.
And he did. And ultimately I recorded a guided meditation for him. And he was so excited one day to come to one of our meetings. And he said, okay, I've got stats for you. These were my stats in terms of completed passes, in terms of touchdown passes, before I started using the guided meditation. Then I started practicing it every single day. And now here are my stats. And the numbers were obvious. And he's like,
Whoa.
this stuff works.
That's amazing. That's
And it's
amazing.
really, I mean, not every athlete is so stat focused, but I loved that. And this stuff really does work.
Yeah.
So yeah.
The other thing to think about, I'm sure you've thought about, is when you were saying that so many times, you notice the parallel that athletes are also, the process of doing their sport connects them to their true self. And so I imagine that when they are unable to do that sport anymore, it's like there's the mental loss of identity, and then there's just that physical processing that they're so accustomed to, and all of those like positive, neurochemicals that are produced by doing their sport, that's just taken away from them. That
Yes.
must be just so hard. And so, yeah, if there's some process for them to then be able to, process that and maybe produce those chemicals in another way that's okay on their body,
Right.
um, that would just be life-changing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's, so many of them love the more powerful, stronger yoga practices for that reason. It's
Hmm.
okay. I know that maybe this is something that I can keep doing. And it is activating a lot of those neurochemicals that do make me feel good. And it's challenging. Like we obviously, yoga is about the process and the practice and the journey. But we'd be lying if we didn't say we also are all trying to get somewhere with some of these poses. That is not the
Yeah.
goal, but
Yeah.
it's something. It's something. And that really, I mean, these are go-getting athletes that love
Yeah.
this idea of working towards something. So that the asana practice of it is a really big hook for them.
Uh-huh. So you do actually, so how do you teach them yoga, or do you kind of teach them a sequence and have them take it home, or do you, have teachers who you recommend? How do you get them into the asana piece?
Yes, so that it's on a case by case basis, because some
Okay.
athletes will come to me with that first. Also, because I did study concussions, I do have a lot of athletes that come and are dealing with recovering from a concussion, and so we'll start with the asana piece and use this as a way to reconnect to their body. Like when you have a concussion, there's, in a very real way, this severing between the body and the mind, and there's this disconnect that you have to reestablish. So through the practice of yoga, we help them regain some of that. So that's often what happens. But then I do have the athletes that come to me for just mental performance from the get-go, and it varies. Like for some of them, if we're meeting, I'll just show them a short sequence. I'll show them something that they can do as sort of a warm up before they start moving their body. Um, and I let them take the lead on that to figure out what's really going to serve them. What do they need?
Hmm. Hmm. How long have you been in doing your own private practice?
Let's see. Well, I've been working with athletes since I finished my master's. So that was 2009.
Mm-hmm.
But I really launched out on my own in 2018.
Okay.
So that's been, yes, my son was 2 and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to just, I'm going to pour my heart into this private practice, doing this on my own. And here we go. And that's when I was really able to incorporate all of these different aspects of
Yeah.
my background.
So you had a long ramp of working after your sports psychology degree of working with athletes so that when you started your private practice, because it sounds like you have an incredibly fluid way of working with people, which requires a lot of skill. I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about people who are interested in this possible avenue and just like, yeah, how you feel like you can ramp up that skill set, because unlike going to school to, be a psychiatrist or where there's like a whole protocol of things, did you've had to carve your own path with this.
Yes, it's very different in that way. And that's probably why it took a long time for sports psychology to even have a certification. They now do, and I am certified in it, but it was, we're a newer field and there isn't one way to do anything. And my late mentor really was his own guy, and he started doing this work in the 70s, and he just always said, like, don't be me, please don't be me, you've got to be you. And 3 weeks before he passed away, we had an opportunity to walk together on the bluffs in Palos Verdes, and he drew in the dirt circles, and each one represented a different part of me. So he drew one for neuroscience, he drew one for sports psychology, he drew one for yoga, and then he drew one for mom. And he said, your work will be at the intersection of all of these. And at the time, I didn't really know how I was going to do that. Like, it felt as though I was being called over here to talk about neuroscience, or I was being called over here to do yoga, or called over here to talk about sports psych. Like, it wasn't, and the mom stuff wasn't a part of any of this. And it's now, I've just allowed it to unfold, and I've followed what has lit me up. And so, I mean, I think that there's no textbooks can teach you this stuff. It's getting out there and it's getting the experience. And part of why I love doing what I do is that I learn so much from the athletes that I work with. I learned that, okay, I thought this approach would work with you. I thought this technique would work. And they say, I have a gymnast who we started doing a lot of imagery, and I talked to her about the science of it. And she's like, I just keep seeing myself falling off the beam or crashing after the vault. Like, this isn't working. And I said, okay, let's not do it. And so then what we started doing is she's drawing stick figures, like frame by frame, of what she needs to be doing. And that was just kind of an idea that came to me, and that's been working for her. And so she taught me that, like, you can't go in with this cookie cutter way of doing it. You just allow yourself to be open to every experience as a learning opportunity, and just embrace all of it, and then just keep walking.
Well, that's a great teacher in you, because yeah, that makes sense to me that some people can visualize things in their mind and some people do better by, doing the kinesthetic learning, drawing, and then seeing it visually in front of them. So that's awesome. That's really cool. Do you have a little boy, right?
I do. He's 5.
He's a lucky little guy. He's gonna be exposed to so many cool things.
And he's doing yoga. He takes
Is
yoga
he?
and he loves it. And he loves showing us all different poses. And I've continued the tradition that my parents started, and we meditate with him at night. And sometimes he meditates with us, and sometimes he's like making sounds and crawling all over our bodies. And but it's really cool to sort of be the neuroscientist and watch how his brain is forming. I mean, that's what's so awesome about being a parent, right? Is it's like we can see those neurons, those synapses forming, and
It's amazing.
just remarkable.
It really is like the things that maybe they struggle with, 3 months later, you'll see it click for them. And it's like, wow, that development is fascinating. It's really fascinating. Well, you've really inspired me in so many ways, but especially to do a nightly meditation practice with our kid. Um, we've done all these different things, but we haven't done a ritual, and a ritual is such a great idea. And I always think of meditating in the morning because that's what works well for me.
Right.
But who's to say that a nice little nighttime, because most kids have a nighttime routine. So
Right.
incorporating that one more step just
Yeah.
sounds so lovely. Um, do you teach him any particular technique? Do you just sit quietly? Do you sometimes guide him? How do you guys do it?
Yeah, it all varies. But first, I do want to acknowledge that I'm the same way. I do my meditation practice in the morning, and I try sometimes, I'll say 20% of the time, try to do one in the evening, and it's rough. Like it's
Me
messy. And
too.
I
Yeah.
know that's part of the process and it should
Mhm.
be. But
Right.
so I kind of take this 3-minute meditation in the evening as my meditation practice in the evening. And then maybe I'll journal or I'll do something else. But yes, a couple of the techniques. So we will sometimes just sit for a minute and that's it. Sometimes I'll guide him to just put, and my husband's in there too, and we'll just put our hands on our belly and just feel the belly move up and down while we breathe. When he was, even now, sometimes he'll like hold a stuffed animal and then watch that move. He
That's
really
sweet.
likes the hand meditation. So he just holds up, we all hold up our hand, and then we trace each finger. And as you move up to the tip of the finger, you breathe in. And then as you breathe out, as you move down, you breathe out. And so you just go through that 5 breaths. And then he actually added this part. He puts his hands on his heart and then just feels love. And then we end it that way. And then sometimes a little plug for some of these apps. I mean, my husband and I love Peloton, and they have some really great 5-minute meditations. And so we'll just put one of those on.
Yeah,
Or
we
even,
have the Calm app. It's
yes, I was going
awesome.
to say
It's so
calm.
good.
So good. And
Yeah.
sometimes it really helps for our kids to hear someone else guide. I mean, I've noticed that sometimes my son just doesn't want to listen to me guide him.
Yep. Yep.
But it's fun to, press start on the app and we'll listen to that way. So there's a million different things, but it is a beautiful routine to have. And sometimes, yes, it's very messy, but you stick with it. And I know it's going to serve them when
Mm.
they're out of our homes.
Yeah, especially since you grew up with it. That's just amazing. You're the first person no, actually, I have one other friend who grew up meditating with his family. And he's still an avid meditator. He's been on the podcast, Jamal Yogis. Um, when you were growing up and you were meditating with your family, how did it shift and change as you got into like your preteen years and your teen years?
Yes, I don't remember as much
Okay.
family meditation.
Right.
But part of that too was just because of our schedules as
Right.
well. So, I was off at class and rehearsals, and my brother was playing basketball, and my dad worked really long hours, and a lot of that was part of it. But we still kept, it was still something we talked about a lot. And my parents always brought us back to like, this is your anchor. This is a practice that you always have and you can always go to. And all the stuff that you go through as a teenager, like it was so empowering to know that I had this thing that I could go to. And truthfully, I think my brother and I probably took it for granted in a lot of ways because we didn't. I think sometimes when you find meditation as an adult, you really are like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm so committed. But when that's all you ever know, like with everything else in that way, you sometimes take advantage of it. And truthfully, I think I really came back to it in college when I started having some like anxiety stuff. Like I would have acute panic attacks.
Mhm.
And that's when I was like, okay, I need to go back. I know what to do. I have this
Right.
practice.
That's so great that you knew you had that available to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there anything else I missed or anything you want to add to all that we talked about?
No, I think, sometimes people say, gosh, and you even mentioned this, I wish I had studied neuroscience, or I wish I could have done this. And I say there's so much coming out now, and there are a lot of scientists that love to communicate this information to non-scientists.
Oh,
So
that's a great. I was going to ask you
yes,
if there's any resources people could look at.
yeah, don't go to primary journal articles. I mean, like, those things are impossible to get through.
Right.
But yes, I mean, I love writing about this stuff, and there, I'd have to put some thought into some other easily accessible resources. But
But you have
yes,
a newsletter or a blog?
I do. Yes, I write
Okay.
a weekly blog and send it out in my newsletter, and I do just that. The blog touches on mental skills, yoga philosophy, and neuroscience, and it ties
I
it all
love it.
together for anyone. And really, I talk about the science, but it's really approachable and fun and interesting, and I just get to the essence of what these studies are saying. And then I think it's always important to not just theorize, but to know, okay, how can I put this into practice? How can I start changing some of these habits that I have, or like really making it practical, because we're all on this path of growth and evolution. That's why we're here. That's why we want to do this. So here are some tools to do it. Yes, it's been such a thrill to talk about all of these things with you. And I just encourage everyone to follow what lights you up and read about all this research that's coming out, and just get so curious about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm excited. I signed up for your newsletter a few weeks before I reached out to you, and it's great. And it is so useful. So I will definitely put a link to that for people on the show notes page. And we can all keep learning. It's so exciting. Thank you so much for being here, Daya.
Thank you so much for having me.